Welcome back. Customs and Border Protection's ready to take the next step in its post-quantum cryptography journey. CBP's been working on quantum computing issues for several years now. Ed Mays is Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Infrastructure and Support Services for the Office of Information and Technology at CBP. Ed, welcome. It's great to see you again. What is your post-quantum cryptography journey, and why is quantum so important to CBP?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. And I think that quantum computing and post-quantum cryptography are important because the world is changing around us. I think sometimes we get caught by surprise because we're not prepared. I look at the leadership and guidance that we're receiving from the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and I think it's driving us to the solutions that we need for our nation. It's really important because we need to be the most ready when the nation is the least ready, right? The American people are depending on us to provide solutions and to defend our country, right? Whether that's a border solution or an economic solution, but the American people are depending on us to be thinking ahead. We have adversaries that are out there that have fewer rules, and they're making great progress, so we need to be ready. So why do I say that? When you look at things, all of our technology, whether it's your mobile device, your watch, satellites, your microwave oven, everything has cryptography or ciphers built into them, right? And most of them are what's called elliptic curve algorithms, which means they're highly factorable. Quantum computers, when they become powerful enough, right, they will be able to slice through that encryption like a hot knife through butter. And that's coming from a Marine, right, a retired Marine. And I think it's important to know that because we get so, we think we're safe. And if no one's doing anything, you find yourself in a really tough situation later on, trying to catch up and trying to repair things. So we're very proactive over at CBP. We look at the mission sets that we have. We look at the adversaries that are out there, and we know they're making great progress. So how do we defend ourselves against that? When you look at programs that are in CBP, like the automated commercial environment, the automated commercial environment, or ACE, is really the lifeblood. It tracks everything coming into our economy, whether it's via, an airport, a seaport, via rail, whatever it is, right? All that trade is coming in via ACE. How do we protect ACE for the future? One of those things that we're going to have to do is, implement PQC so that we can stop, the adversaries from harming our country and impacting our economy, impacting our border, and the livelihoods of all Americans.
Where would you say you are on this post-quantum cryptography journey? Easy for me to say. And where would you like to go on that journey, Ed?
So I'd say that we've worked with NIST and others. Probably about 2 years ago, we did one of the first proofs of concept in government with PQC. And I think it was highly successful. We learned a lot. I mean, I'm a doctor of IT, and I thought I knew a lot about quantum. Turned out that I was wrong. And we learned a lot more about, processing times and what it's going to require from a compute perspective, and, where all the cryptography is laced throughout our systems. It's everywhere. So it's not just as simple as one would think, right? And that impacts how systems are built. So where are we now? We did the PQC, POC, and then we moved now to, we're going to do hopefully this year, we're going to envelop one of our high value assets, which is an application, and we're going to try and get that done by this calendar year, right? So we're going to put a PQC related wrapper around this, right? And if that's successful, we'll learn a lot from it. And then we'll look at the rest of the technology stack, from the hardware to the operating system and so on. But it is not as simple as, most people would assume. We'll just replace the ciphers or cryptography that's already there, because we don't know all the new interactions and the processing time or the compute required. So it's a great journey to be on, but I think that what we do, the outcomes that'll be achieved, will lead us to making our country safer.
There's still a lot of questions about when quantum will be, I'm using air quotes, ready, when it will be a factor for adversaries to use, for good guys like yourself to use to defend United States assets. How does one strategize in that kind of an environment where you're not sure when the threat is coming and you're not necessarily sure what form the threat will take, how powerful it will be, and so on?
Well, I think the big strategy is this: knowing that something will happen, right? You may not necessarily know when, but we do know that we have a capability that if we get it in place, will make it much harder for quantum computers to actually break into our networks and break through firewalls, etc. Right? So that is the goal. So we know that we can slow it down or stop it, right? To some degree. So with that knowledge, now you do that. What's my risk level, right? We in the modern world, we don't have the time that we had to respond to things like in the past. I know you had someone earlier talking about AI, we talk about cyber defense. The challenges against our networks now are much greater than they used to be. I mean, if you look at CBP, we're like 100 million attacks or attempts against our network a day. So what was that like 10 years ago? Almost nil. So as quantum computers continue to develop, and they are out there, right? If we're ready, then we have a chance. If we're not, then it's going to be very, very interesting for us as a nation.
One of the rhetorical questions you mentioned a moment ago, Ed, what's my risk level? How has the risk management calculus changed as you've learned more about quantum and you've seen some of these? You said these computers are out there. As you've started to see that, how has that changed the way that you think about the risk associated?
Well, I will tell you, a couple of years ago, I was visiting, I won't name the vendor, but I was visiting a vendor that's working on quantum computing. And I quickly realized, after about a couple of hours of watching and touching, and looking at quantum development, and I quickly realized that if we don't do something now, and I think at DHS at the time, the leadership, right, and continuing today, right, what are we going to do if this occurs, right? So my risk calculus and probably my blood pressure probably went up a little bit because, what do we have in place? And the answer at that time was literally nothing. I think we are a lot more aware now, and we've started, especially with OMB coming out saying, go out and really look at your networks, look at your software, and catalog what you have in terms of ciphers that need to be replaced or encryption that needs to be replaced. So we've done a lot of that prep work, and again, that was much more than I thought it was going to be. Right? Initially, I thought it was going to be an easy sort of approach, but it's a complex problem. But now that we know what we have, I think that we're going to be able to put some things in place that will slow things down if there's going to be a quantum attack in the future, an attack by a quantum computer.
Ed, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
You can read more about CBP's quantum journey on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment.